Hello, everybody. I'm Jolie Hamilton. I'm the AASECT PESC, which stands for Professional Education Steering Committee Chair. And that means that I'm in charge of making sure people know how to apply to become AASECT, among other things. It's kind of a complicated process if you haven't seen it from the inside. But we're going to break it down today. I'm happy to answer questions as well. And if at any point you have a question and you want to just type into the chat so that I have it, that would be great. I'm going to try to answer questions as I go. I think I've anticipated some of your questions, but surely there will be more. So I don't want to wait too long, and we're going to get started because this is recorded so people can catch up if they missed anything. I'm going to share a screen with you so that you can stare at my lovely PowerPoint slides instead of my face. If everybody just makes sure that they're muted, that would be ideal so we don't get any kickback. Feel free to type questions into the chat, and then I'll answer them. If I see the chat come up with something really pertinent, I'll answer it right then. Otherwise, I'll wait and I'll answer at the end. And other than that, yeah, I think we'll go ahead and start. Let's see. So, becoming an AASECT continuing education provider. Well, continuing education is a big thing when it comes to AASECT because, of course, we have to get CEs in order to become certified. We have to get CEs to stay certified. But the process of becoming a provider is about who gets to provide said CEs. And there is a committee that will review applications in order to determine who gets to provide CEs. So the CE Approval Committee is one of 3 committees that falls under my position as PESC. There are currently 3 certified members and 6 mentee members. They're pre-certification members who are learning the process of the CE Approval Committee. And the PESC can audit providers as well as actually review the application at the outset. This can happen by complaint or randomly, but the bottom line, what you need to know about the committee is that they're appointed for 2 years and they work together to make sure that we are providing quality continuing education credits. So who can become an AASECT CE provider? I think this is the most asked question I get. And the bottom line is a certified member of AASECT or a planning committee that has a certified member on it. That's what's needed. In order to become a CE provider, we need a certified member to be overseeing the planning and to be making sure that all of the guidelines and expectations are being followed. The first thing to think about when you're trying to decide where you fit into this continuing education picture is to think about, do I want to go with a single event application, or do I want to go down that provider application route? So this is the first decision. If you go with a single event application, this is a pay-as-you-go model. This means that every time you want to offer a new class, you're going to fill out the whole application, and you're going to go through the CE approval process. Now, you don't have to follow what we call the 80% rule. The 80% rule you'll see this come up as we talk about each part of the organization. The 80% rule means that 80% of the teaching has to be provided by the certified member who applied in order to provide the CEs. With a single event application, you don't need to follow the 80% rule, but you do need to apply fresh for every class that you're offering. Now, there are 3 tiers to our provider status. The 3 tiers start with the individual tier, and then the organizational 1 and organizational 2. The individual application, the person signing up in this direct way is they have to be an AASECT certified member, and they have to commit to presenting at least 80% of the training at each event held. And this is critical. That 80% amount means that's the deciding factor often when somebody's trying to choose which route. Do I do individual? Do I do organizational 1? If you're a certified member and you are providing the vast majority of the training yourself, an individual status will work just fine. On the other hand, if you're going to utilize a variety of experts to deliver your training, then you're faced with a choice of either Organizational 1 or Organizational 2 status. Organizational 1 status, they offer 40 or fewer AASECT CE credits per year. This can be done through a variety of experts, but 40 or fewer AASECT credits per year. Now, an Organizational 2 can offer more than 40 AASECT CE credits per year. Many of them provide quite a bit more than 40, but that's the cutoff. And when do you do all of this? Well, if you want to apply for a single event, you can apply for a single event anytime you want. You send the application to ce@asec.org and you'll go through the process. We try to turn those around in a couple of weeks, but I recommend that you submit the application 4 to 6 weeks ahead, because there are times where we're full, we're busy, and you don't want to be stuck in a spot where you're not sure whether you can promote your event as having the option for AASECT CEs if your application hasn't been approved yet. If you're going for a provider application, no matter which level, individual, Org 1 or Org 2, those applications need to be submitted in time for 2 yearly deadlines. Those deadlines are May 1st and November 1st. And what that means is your application and all of the attendant materials, which we're going to go through piece by piece, all of the materials, all of that needs to be submitted for those deadlines. So you want to start preparing probably at least a month ahead of time. I often see people preparing during the whole 6-month cycle. They'll be putting together their application and making sure they have all of the attendant materials filled out and all of that. Because if your application comes in without all of those materials, you're going to run into some slowness. Your application may not get through on the first round because we have to stop, send the application back to get more materials. So you really want to take your time, give yourself the time so that you can meet those 2 deadlines. And the cost. The cost of becoming a CE provider, it's broken down like this. The single events, you see whether you're going to go for less than 9, up to 9 CE credits is $100, over 9, $200. If you want to be an individual level provider, that's again somebody who's providing 80% of the training themselves. That's a $300 fee for a 2-year cycle. Organizational 1 is a $500 fee for a 2-year cycle, and Organizational 2 is a $2,000 fee for a 2-year cycle. It's quite a lot more. Many of those Organizational 2 providers are providing quite a lot more than 40 CEs, and there is no upper threshold, actually. So the single event application process. Now, this is important for everyone. If you're going to become a provider in the sense that you are going to provide you're going to become a provider like an Org 2 or an Org 1 or an individual, you're still going to have to fill out a single event application. So pay attention to this part too. It is a pay-as-you-go model, and you apply individually for each event, and you'll need to have a certified member. This comes up all the time. You have to have an AASECT certified member as part of the planning committee. And it has to include all of the documentation. Provider applications need to have a single event application attached to them, along with all of the documentation. So you'll have actually 2 applications if you're applying to become a provider. You'd have your single event application and your providership application, and you're going to submit all of the documents that go along with the single event application, and you're going to do that every 2 years that you want to be a provider. So these additional materials that I keep talking about, the reason I keep talking about them is they're actually the meat of the application. It's very important that you fill the application itself out completely and that you sign it. The signing is the liability signature. That's very important. But you'll also need to provide for us a grievance procedure in writing, exactly the steps that students should take if they are not satisfied with their educational experience. The learning objectives. There's 1 CE per, you need 1 learning objective per CE credit that you're requesting. You'll need to understand your core knowledge areas, and you'll tie those to your learning objectives. Now, if you don't know what core knowledge areas are yet, we're going to get to that. Don't worry too much about it. You're going to need your references. You need at least 1 reference or resource per learning objective, per CE. And then you need to provide a syllabus or an outline, and the syllabus or outline also needs to have a schedule that includes the timing of the program, including the breaks. This is a thing that gets missed sometimes. People will include a syllabus, but they forget to provide me with the timing. If I don't have the timing, then I can't calculate whether you have requested the appropriate number of CEs for your event. And it's important that you list out the breaks because breaks don't count. You'll also need to include the CVs or resumes of all of the presenters. And if you have a planning committee, you'll provide the CVs for those people as well, up to 3. You know, if you have a planning committee with 8 or 16 members, I don't need all of those, up to 3 is just fine. You'll also need to provide your evaluation form. And if the event is pre-recorded, you'll need a post-test because you'll need to actually see that people have attended the training and received their education. And then you'll need to provide us with promotional material. And this is so that I can see how you're promoting the event and so that I can help you, guide you to providing students with the appropriate language so that we're not accidentally conflating independent programs with AASECT itself. Promotional material, when you get to the application for this, it says right on there, not a URL. The application is a bit out of date in that respect. Most promotional material right now is done online. So I'm happy to receive URLs so I can go check out the material. It's a much more effective way. I don't need you to make that into a PDF. I'm happy to go check it online. Now, piece by piece, the first piece I said that you would need to provide is a grievance procedure. It's important that your grievance procedure outlines the steps that your attendants would need to take if there's an event-related problem that they experience. And this should start by giving them the exact name of whoever handles your grievances. But you do also need to include this very specific piece of language. It reads, if earlier action steps fail to resolve the problem, ASEC should be contacted at ce@asec.org. Now, it's important to note that this is about continuing education issues.
Giving them the exact.
Oh, I think somebody's unmuted. There we go. So if, I think somebody's unmuted, there we include this exact language, then your grievance procedure will go through our process. If you don't, I'll wind up sending it back to you, asking you to include the grievance procedure, and then we'll loop back around through the process. The second piece that comes up where you need specific language is promotional materials. That specific language I was talking about is where we want to differentiate between AASECT as an organization and the organization that is providing CEs. These are 2 separate things. So all promotional materials, well, it's tempting to put something like, oh, we're offering an AASECT CE program. Yes, but we want to make sure that the public understands that the program is separate from AASECT itself. So I want you to use this specific language that reads, this program meets the requirements for the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, and is approved for, insert the number of CE credits. Completion of this program does not ensure or guarantee AASECT certification. And for further information, please contact. And the reason we do that second to last sentence is that when somebody's applying for certification, there's a vast amount of information that is collected and submitted, and no one particular program is going to guarantee that certification process. So it's important that that is on your promotional materials. You'll probably do this with an asterisk and then putting the specific language down below. I've seen it presented many ways. There are a lot of ways to make sure that this information is conveyed. Resources. You're going to need to provide essentially a bibliography. I need a full list of resources that are used to create your CE offering. There's a minimum of 1 resource per CE requested. You're welcome to give more. And resources could include personal experience. So if you have someone sharing on a panel their lived experience is the resource. So as long as the resource can be obviously tied to the CE that you're providing, that's the important part. I encourage people to list their scholarly resources and list all of the other attendant resources as well. How do CE hours relate to CE credits? So 1 hour equals 1 CE credit, which is great, except we need to just note that 1 hour is also the minimum for any CE event. And then after that, credits may be granted in half units, but not quarter units. So you can do 90 minutes, but you can't do, 75. I almost lost my math completely there for a second. Okay. Now we're in the meat of it, because learning objectives. This is a place where we struggle with applications quite a lot. So it's important to take your time around this. The main thing to do is when you're writing a learning objective, you want to follow the SMART guidelines, SMART. You want to follow those SMART guidelines for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound learning objectives. There is a video going through how to do this that our former PESC, Raz Deshavo, created. It's linked through. I can provide that link for anyone who wants to see it. The reason it's important that learning objectives follow those SMART guidelines is that we want the measurable piece to be very obvious. We want to be able to actually measure whether people are receiving the educational credits that we say they are. And if we say things, if we use words like student will understand, it's exceptionally difficult to measure whether someone understands something, especially in a short format. So instead we use words like a student will be able to describe 3 ways that. And that is by and large the biggest place where people, they wind up sending me learning objectives that either are overly complex and have multiple objectives actually glommed into one, or that just don't follow the SMART guidelines. There's actually a list of words right on the application to draw your objectives from. Those words will help you guide you to a SMART guideline, a SMART learning objective. You're going to want 1 learning objective per CE requested, and you're going to want to tie those learning objectives to the core knowledge areas, the sex education training areas, the sex counseling training areas, the sex therapy training areas. And we refer to these as CKAs or CETs, SCTs. The important thing to know is that a core knowledge area is concerned with what the information, the facts, the information, the basic ideas of a subject. The training areas are concerned with how someone applies that information. So it's important to delineate between these two things, because people often will just sort of throw the whole alphabet at their learning objectives. And I'm just going to show how this winds up working out on an application. So let's say somebody has a CE event where they've applied for they have 4 learning objectives. And they go through this list. These are our core knowledge areas.
Hi, can I please get...
Oh, could somebody mute? Thanks. And they go through these core knowledge areas and they start throwing all of the letters. They tie all the letters to a particular learning objective. A common one to see people throw onto almost any hour of learning is the ethics and ethical behavior. It gets tossed in because oftentimes we think, hey, we're talking about sex ed. We're almost always talking about ethical behavior. But what's important about these core knowledge areas is that we want to make sure that we're actually addressing specifically for like at least a half an hour, the specific topic that is being listed as the core knowledge area that's being covered, or the training area. So the training areas look like this. And you list them out on the application and you tie them to your learning objective. So let's say you're teaching about consent. Well, consent falls under, oh goodness, I can't even read these because they're tiny on my screen. Consent would fall under one of the particular core knowledge areas, and then it would also follow that consent falls under one of the training areas. But you don't want to list that as falling under like every single core knowledge area. You want to be specific. This is a kind of complicated thing that winds up getting kind of sticky. Don't be afraid to ask questions. It's completely reasonable. If you get an application sent back and because the learning objectives are unclear, ask questions. We're happy to help figure that out.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Dr. Hamilton or Miss Hamilton, I'm sorry, I might have missed your introduction, but I just needed to clarify. So with the organizational application, there just needs to be an AASECT certified member on the committee.
On the planning committee, yep.
Okay, just one.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody needs to be responsible for adhering to all of the guidelines that we lay out.
Right.
And that person needs to be a certified professional member.
But they do not have to do 80% of the teaching or presenting.
If you're an organizational provider, that is correct. Or if you're providing if you're doing a single event application. So if you're doing a single event and you have a planning committee, you may use a variety of experts to put your training out there. But if you're doing the individual providership is the one where the 80% comes into play.
No, it will be organizational.
Cool.
And so we would just need to have that one special
person, right?
Yeah.
Somebody needs to be putting eyes on all of the materials, on the syllabus, on the outline. They need to be involved in the planning.
All right, this sounds great. Thank you so much. This is so helpful.
Oh, I'm glad.
Lastly, will the PowerPoint be sent out?
I'm happy to share these slides out. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So records. The therapists that I work with often are like, of course, this is the general rule that we have to follow for other organizations, but it's important to note that records, there's a specific way that AASECT has asked that records be kept. They need to be double locked system, and that goes for digital as well as physical, which does sometimes complicate things. So remember to keep things password protected, and that means you'll need 2 levels of passwords. And you're keeping records for a minimum of 7 years. The records that need to be kept, you need to keep the attendance of classes. You need to keep the dates the classes were held. You need to keep the learning objectives that were covered during that class, the evaluations that you collected, and post-tests, if there were post-tests. Evaluations and tests. Evaluations and assessments aren't the same thing, so it's important that you keep both. CE credits can't be issued without evaluations, so you got to keep all of that, all those records together. So some really common questions that come up about the provider application. Question number 6 is, how do you, A, select instructors, and or B, develop content to respect issues of diversity? This question trips people up all the time. And I recognize that it can be confusing, especially because every organization will have its own standards that it's trying to adhere to, as well as you're trying to answer this question in a way that will satisfy us. What's important to us here is that you are taking into account the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion, that you are making sure that this is top of mind. This is part of your system. And you're just going to explain to us how you make it a part of your system. How does this add into your work? How does your organization handle these things? It can be answered in 3 or 4 sentences. I don't need a whole, treatise on how you handle it, but I do want to see that you're making an attempt. And if you don't know, then feel free to ask questions about where you could possibly look to get training to develop this aspect of your organization. Happy to point people in directions. And question 7 also trips people up. How do you provide accessibility for people with diverse learning styles and or diverse abilities? List out the stuff you do. When we're accommodating, when we're making accommodations, often the ones that are straightforward to us, we forget to list, the ones that are top of mind for us, we forget to list. And then we get to a question like this and it becomes confusing. Be clear, list whether you are putting yourself in a building that has accessibility. List whether you are providing a captioning system. Oh, somebody's unmuted again, sorry. List whether you are doing captions or doing whether you're providing scholarships for diversity's sake. Name these things. Let us know how you are moving towards an inclusive atmosphere. And then there are 2 other questions that trip people up. And one of the reasons why is because it's only for the organizational 1 and 2 providers. It's not for the individual provider. So you can skip these 2 questions if you're an individual provider. These questions are about the chain of command. I need you to list out what the chain of command for the organization is. You might have a chart. You can just include that chart and say, please see chart. You might just actually write out what the chain of command is, but I want to know who's making the decisions in this particular organization. And then I need to see proof of documentation of your accreditation if you're an accredited school, or incorporation if you are incorporated. I want to see a list of the major goals and functions of the organization, and then the identifying information and the CVs of up to 3 planning committee members. I, again, don't need, if you have 12 planning committee members, I don't need all of them, but I do need, obviously, the certified member to be included in that. And we work on a 2-year cycle. So all providers have to reapply with a complete application. And that means your provider application, as well as a new single event application. It can't be the same one you used last time. And all the attendant documents for that single event application. So it's a packet that you put together, and you do this every 2 years. May 1st and November 1st deadlines happen every year. And renewals also need to include a list of every event that had CE credits given for it for the previous 2-year cycle. So that said, I'm sure people had questions. I wanted to just like run through how applying works, but often we really get the answers we need when we ask questions. So let's see, I'm gonna look at the chat and see what I see first. Let's see. Are there CEs available for people not certified that are practicing? Well, CEs, AASECT CEs are available to anyone who wants them, and you need to accumulate CEs in order to become certified. So CEs are available to people who are currently practicing and are on the way to their certification. I think that's what you mean, but if it's not, please do clarify. I see another question about, is this a calendar year? Yeah, the 2-year cycle runs. Kelly, are you on? Do you want to explain that? I'm trying to think of how to explain the.
I am, yes. So if you apply at the May 1st deadline, your cycle would be July 1st to 2 years after, until June 30th, 2 years later. And then same thing with the November cycle. The start date is January 1. So it would be 2 years from January 1.
Yeah.
Hope that helps.
And we do our level best to turn the provider applications around. And if the more complete your application is, the better chance it'll be that you will get a quick turnaround. So it's worth asking questions. I know there are a couple of you on here who have interacted with me. Send me an email, ask me the questions. I'll provide my email. Getting the questions answered makes it much more possible to send in a complete application. So let's see the next question. When submitting an organization to provider, do we need to have all of the providers, instructors included? You need to provide the planning committee, and you need to provide me with the attendant documents for the single event application, but I don't need to know everybody who's ever going to present for you. You're going, like, you may have tons and tons of people present for you. I need to know who that certified member is, who's part of the planning committee, and I need to know what the structure of the organization is, but I don't need a complete list of every presenter you ever have. Let's see. I see a question from June. And June, if you want to give me more information about that question, I would be happy to answer it. I'm not quite sure I get where you're going. I see another question from Allie. June, if you want to come back around, feel free. I see a question from Allie. Is a certified educator permitted to be a CE provider for counselors or therapists, or are there restrictions to be aware of? Well, you could certainly be a CE provider for core knowledge areas, because core knowledge areas are shared by counselors, therapists, and educators. So you wouldn't be providing the sex therapy training areas, but Absolutely. Core knowledge areas, absolutely. And many therapists enjoy taking educator classes as well. So they may be in a class that has sex educator training as well. So yeah, absolutely. And somebody else asked about this double locked and what is confidential. So this is it's an interesting world we live in now. I asked a few experts in the field about what double locked means now that we live in a cloud society. And yeah, the answers are kind of all over the place. And I know some people who are working on this like at pretty high levels, and they work in all HIPAA compliant scenarios. But the bottom line is there isn't a clear answer. So what I want to encourage you to do is think of double locked as at least 2 barriers to someone gaining entry. So use password protected files, use encryption if you're using the cloud, and be thoughtful about how you store identifying information and what you tie it to. So that's the best I can do for you. My partner was seeking this answer out for about 3 months for me, and it's a surprisingly tricky answer, and he had access to the right people, and there's a lot of arguing about it. Can I speak about the 1-to-1 CE credits via affiliate organizations and 2-for-1 for peer educators? Frederick, do you want to clarify your question for me?
Sure. It is my understanding that if, for instance, someone asked about giving a lecture for a cancer organization, or for instance, if you're giving a lecture for the Quad-S conference, which is an affiliate organization, or if you're lecturing at a university, also an affiliate institution. It's my understanding if you give a 1-hour lecture, or let's say a 2-hour lecture there, that counts as 2 CEs for AASECT as far as membership, application, what have you. If you are doing as a peer educator, it is 2-to-1, so that if you give a 2-hour lecture, non-affiliated, that only counts as 1 hour. Is that
so?
correct?
You know what? I believe I have heard this too, but this is actually a question for the certifying committee. The chair of that is right now Eric Garrison. I would want to clarify that with him. So, but feel free to follow up. I can make sure I get an answer to be sure. I believe you have the numbers right, but yeah, that's in certifications domain. How do I count the 40 CEs? If I run the same 3 CE course 3 times, does that equal 3 CEs or 9 CEs? That equals 3. That equals 3. You can run the class over and over again in that cycle. So it's how many different CEs you're providing. That's the trick. But that's an excellent question, Fitz. I really should have worn my glasses today. Let's see. June, I'm an AASECT certified counselor. I'm invited to do several presentations every year on sexual health issues, and I've completed a certificate on sexuality education. I'm a physician. So yeah, so if you're a certified counselor, June, counselors are definitely there. That's definitely a position you can apply to provide CEs from. So if your question is, if you're a certified AASECT counselor, absolutely. You could apply as an individual. You could apply for single events. Absolutely, you could totally do that. And let's see. The information we have is not protected, not a HIPAA issue. You know, Braden, the security issue, the double locked issue, it may be a holdover from days gone by when the double locked system was just sort of the standard, because we were talking about filing cabinets and office doors, but it's still on the application. So until the application is reviewed, I can certainly put it on the list of things to review when we're actually in the process of transitioning to an online application, which will be so much easier for us to collect data and handle your applications. But for now, the application exists stating that records need to be kept double locked and for 7 years. So since you're signing off on that, there it is. If our November 1st application is approved, does that mean the first course we can provide has to be during this 2-year cycle starting January 2021? That is how I understand it. Kelly, I have heard on occasion some exceptions being made to this, but I don't know whether those were COVID related. Like there was some confusion this spring about deadlines, and I don't know whether that was COVID related or whether that was an always policy.
Yeah, that is correct as stated. So if you apply November 1st, your course, the course should take place in the 2-year cycle starting January 2021 through January 1st of 2023.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Are you offering CME? I don't believe we do, right? No, we don't. Sorry, you don't offer CME right now. I'm considering which organizations we might reach out to for the conference, but currently no. Once an approved provider, do we need to submit single event applications during the 2-year cycle, or are we trusted to develop additional courses on our own? You are trusted to develop additional courses on your own. Once you become an approved provider of the individual, organizational 1 or organizational 2 levels, that is your permission to create courses. And you just recognize that you could be audited randomly at any point, or you could be audited because there was a complaint made. So follow the rules, follow those same guidelines. And if you have questions along the way, don't feel like you have to know the answer. If you're in your cycle and you were approved and you have a question, please do follow up and ask. It's okay to have questions. You don't have to be an expert on everything. Capturing attendance in a virtual environment. What are the recommendations if the group exceeds over 20 individuals? Yeah, so taking a screenshot of Zoom screens is a common one. Using a roster, using a collector, using a moderator during a Zoom session. Oftentimes people will have a moderator who's actually tracking who's in the class, whose camera's on. It depends on what your requirements are. If you're requiring people to have their cameras on because you're not gonna do a post test, then I would strongly recommend using a moderator rather than trying to ask the person trying to convey the actual education. It's just too complicated. So I'd have a moderator sort of tracking overall and contacting via chat anyone who drops off. And the other option that I've seen some people picking up is that they're creating post tests of the material, even though it's not a pre-recorded webinar because they're struggling to find the moderators. So you could go that way. If we're approved as an Org 1 and during the 2 years we decide to exceed our 40 credits, can we upgrade? Yeah, you'll upgrade your fee too, but you can ask for an amendment and that can be handled. Do you require the evaluations at the time of each presentation? So anytime someone participates in a CE event, they're going to need to give you an evaluation afterwards. There are a couple of specific things that we require to be on evaluations. They're laid out. You need to ask about the presenter. Was the presenter, communicating with their students? Was the venue accessible in the ways that you were promised for it to be? And those evaluations need to be collected and then kept, because that's the proof that the person was actually in the event. If we're planning to launch a CE program in fall of 2021, can I apply by 11/1, if you can get it together, but ask that the 2-year cycle start in July 1? You don't want to wait until the May 1st deadline. Sure. So yeah, I mean, I could put you into an earlier cycle. Kelly, I don't see a problem with that. Reviewing someone in one cycle and then delaying their application, their 2-year cycle start. That doesn't feel like it would be a problem. Just make sure that you make that request clear and in writing so that we can file it with our documentation. Because yeah, you're right. There could be trouble. Sometimes when you're applying that first time, there are discontinuities in communication that make it challenging. So yeah, if you'd like to get ahead of it, I can understand that. Explain in more detail a post-test, please. So a post-test is used to verify that someone consumed their educational experience, and that post-test, it should be tied to the material. It should, the questions, the national recommendation, I actually just had to look this up for another reason. The national recommendation is approximately 10 questions per CE hour. It's, you know, it's not, we do not have a written requirement for how many questions at AASECT, but don't have it be only one either. You're not going to get the verification you need. The post tests are used to determine that people were in attendance at events that you weren't monitoring their attendance at. So you don't have to do a post test if you have someone checking attendance. So this is an either or. In my experience, what are the issues that most cause delays in the process? The biggest delays come from people not including all the information. Oftentimes people will be missing a grievance procedure. They'll be missing, people always remember to send me CVs, and they always remember to send me a syllabus or an outline, but timings, actually putting the timings on the syllabus, including a grievance procedure, making sure that you have those 2 pieces of language, the one on the grievance procedure, one on any promotional materials, making sure that the language is actually exactly as stated. And then making sure I can read everything that's on the application, because occasionally I get people who handwrite their applications, and I'm fine with that, but I do need to be able to read it. So making sure it's legible. And other than that, yeah, not too much. It's really just missing information. That's what causes the hang up. So you'll get contacted. If something was missing, you'll get contacted, and then the faster you turn around the material back to me, the quicker the process goes. Sometimes I'll return an application around in a couple of weeks, but I need an additional piece of information. And if it takes 6 or 7 weeks for that additional piece of information to get to me, now we're at 2 months and there wasn't really anything I could do about it. So Jessica would like me to explain the grievance procedure. Your grievance procedure will depend on your organization. It should outline exactly the steps that you want attendants to follow if they are not happy with the services they received. So usually it says something like,
look for the
please, could somebody mute? Thank you. Usually it'll say something about, please provide, please come to this person, and it'll provide their email address to attempt to resolve the problem. And sometimes it'll outline how different grievances are handled, like financial grievances may be handled differently from educational grievances. And then it will include that specific language that just says, if problem could not be resolved, please contact, and it'll have our email address on it. It's a pretty short, it's a half page for most people. Most organizations' grievance procedures are, 4 or 5 steps listed on a half a page. So it's not that it's so big, it's just that oftentimes people don't put these things into words, and you need to make your grievance procedure available to the people who are taking your classes. So this needs to get posted either on a website, or it needs to be mailed to them in their information packet when they first start. You got to make it public, because that's the point. The point is that they know where to go if they have a rough experience. And generally speaking, grievances are generally filed by people who simply want to rectify a situation. So it's actually to your advantage. If you have a clear grievance procedure, they'll know that you are approachable and ready to handle their complaints. So Edie asked, how are grievances rectified or dealt with between you and the clinician? So we do not handle business complaints. That's not our role. My role is to oversee continuing education. So if the complaint is about a business complaint, then that needs to be taken up with the same way you would take up any business complaint. So BBB or any other sort of organization that oversees businesses. But if the issue is one of educational content or communication of that educational content, then those complaints are dealt with on a case-by-case basis. We have an audit process. We have an audit procedure that we go through, and we seek to correct the issue. If the issue is found to be a valid one, we seek to make it as right as we can. Okay. That's all the questions in the side. Does anyone else have any questions, or anybody want to speak any questions? I'm terrible at introductions, Kelly. I barely even said who I am. Like, not my
You
stuff.
did a great job.
I'm always like right into the material. So I know that this is not a thing everybody does, but it is what I do. And people who have known me for a while know that this is just me. I will send you, that's my email address. If you have a question, please ask me. I am more than happy. A couple people in this room I can see have gone back and forth with me over these processes. It's fine. I'm happy to answer questions and make this process more transparent. I know it can be a little overwhelming the first time you do it. So it's totally fine to ask me the questions you need to. And sometimes what you're pointing out about the application process is something I can actually improve. I'm in the process of trying to streamline this process, and hopefully it'll be better and easier to achieve. So if you have problems or you've had problems in the past, please do reach out to me and let me know, because I want to make this process as spectacular as it can be, given that it's still bureaucracy. Cool. Well, I'm glad I could help you all today. I think that might have been everything, Kelly. I think we might have got it.
I think we're set. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks so much.
So good to see you. Take care. Have a great rest of your Monday.
Bye.
Bye.